Sermon of the Week, Expectations, based on the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm lonesome, he said. Lonesome? Well, that's a new one, she said. Well, I am, he reiterated. How in heaven can you be lonesome, she asked, some disdain in her voice. I don't know, I just am. I'm lonesome. Well, tell me, how long have you been lonesome, she asked. Oh, a while, he said in low tones. What? I didn't hear you, she said. A while, he said almost too loudly. You know how that makes me feel? I cook meals for you, I pick up after you, I entertain your friends, we travel all over, we have a wonderful son, and she let it sink in. And you have the privilege of making love to the most beautiful woman in all the universe each and every night. She now stood and marched out of the sumptuous den onto the wide balcony overlooking the lake, which had just been graced by another beautiful sunset. He realized he had pushed too far. He was a proud man, proud of all his accomplishments, but not too proud to accede to the wishes of the love of his life. He got up and walked out onto the balcony and stared at the silhouette of his lovely wife as she stared into the gathering dusk. He then went over to her and slipped both his hands around her waist. She did not resist. He knew she wouldn't. Maybe lonesome was the wrong word, he said, kissing her ear lightly. You think? She said, still annoyed. I just feel like I'm not doing enough. There's something. Emptiness, she said. Well, yes, I guess you could call it that, he said. You know, baby, you have every... I know, but I'm capable of more, much more, but I don't know what it is. What the more is, he said. Baby, I don't know what more you could expect. What more could you do? There is no more, as you put it. You have everything anyone could possibly want. There's nothing else to expect. Just enjoy it all. I certainly do. But you want more, too, don't you, he said. Well... A tear came to her eye. Well, yes, she said. Well, I'm sure that will happen in time, he said, squeezing her middle a little too tightly. When? She asked. I don't know. I expect when everything is settled, he said. When will that be? She said. You've been talking about settling things for a long time, and I don't see anything happening. Your friends want you to sell out so they can take over your business. You'd still have everything, she said. Why don't you go ahead and let them take over, she said. If I step down, I won't be able to keep building the business. I don't think they are capable of running it. If they run it, they'll just run it into the ground, he said. They'll still have all the workforce. I don't see a problem, she said. Besides, if you're so lonely, you could just start up a new business. They wouldn't go for that. They wouldn't like competition, he said. Well, you're a smart guy and just start a business completely different from theirs. But this is what I know. This is what I do. I wouldn't know how to do anything else. Besides, with you as my inspiration, I can expand just as I wish, he said. Sometimes I'm not so sure. I'm not sure I'm always your inspiration, she said, pulling from his grasp and walking to the rail. The purples and blues were taking over the sky from the oranges and reds. Just sell out. They'll run things fine, she said. He stepped behind her again and replaced his arms around her waist. They aren't capable as I am. Things would be okay for a while, but then it would turn and eventually go bankrupt. And I'd have to step back in and try and right the ship. If you're so capable, just teach them what you know. Then it will all go fine. Then we can have some more time together and maybe cure some of my lonesomeness, she said, grinding her luscious hips against him. We all have talents, and I was given far more than my buddies. It's just a fact. We are who we are. Oh, we can achieve more, but we all have limits. They just would not be capable of running such a large company, he said. I think you're wrong, she said. If you show them the ropes and they hire more workforce, I think the business will roll along smooth as ever. She began grinding her hips against him a bit more firmly, and as always, the expected result was happening. When's your next board meeting? 2 days, he said, his voice now much more relaxed. Well, let me attend. I think maybe I could broker a deal, she said. I'm sure you could. No one could resist your charms, he said. He kissed her on the neck, and he, too, now was realizing his expectations. No, I got myself into this. I built this business. I've got to be the one to keep it running smooth as silk, he said. Speaking of silk, she said, how would you like to try out those new pink silk sheets I had made for the bed? She kissed him full on the lips. I thought you'd never ask, spirit darling, he said. Despite their amorous actions, the two somehow made it to the bedroom. The silk sheets did meet all their expectations. Solomon remains one of the most interesting characters in all the Bible, in fact, in all world history. He was born into royalty as the son of King David, the second king of Israel. He was the second son of David by his wife Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah the Hittite, who David had killed in battle. David and Bathsheba's first son was also killed by David on his own order. In any event, Solomon became king at the death of his father, King David. Till recently, the existence of kings David and Solomon were in serious doubt by the scientific world, but in 1993 an artifact was discovered which spoke of the house of David. Subsequent archaeological discoveries have located structures which the Bible says were built by Solomon. Then, you say, maybe, but as more and more evidence verifying the Bible is accumulating, it is likely that King Solomon did exist as the Bible says. And if so, Solomon's story, as recounted by the Old Testament writers, including Solomon himself, are extremely interesting and a more than accurate commentary on the human condition then and now. King Solomon is said to have written 3 books of the accepted Bible: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. Ecclesiastes is a 12-chapter treatise or sermon on that condition, that of humanity. Solomon begins by calling himself a preacher. I guess if he was king, he'd call himself anything he wanted. In a search of history, I can't find anyone who was a preacher and a king. The closest may have been Henry VIII of England, who was born a king but eventually proclaimed himself head of the Church of England. Solomon starts out his second biblical book this way: the words of the preacher, capital letters, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Ecclesiastes 1:1 and 2. Now, why would someone who is king of Israel and arguably the most powerful man in all the world at the time, 1000 BC, say anything so crazy as that? After all, the guy had everything anyone could want. He had all this world could offer and much more. He supposedly communicated with the God of the universe himself, and when he asked for wisdom rather than riches, he was given all of it. God told him many of the secrets of science and the universe, many of which man does not understand to this day. 3,000 years later, God most certainly told Solomon the world was round. Solomon, for reasons unclear, did not share this with his fellow man. It took 2,492 more years for Christopher Columbus to verify that our world is indeed round. Of course, now there's a faction purporting to verify the world is indeed flat after all. Only human intelligence could mix things up to that degree. King Solomon was also the richest man in the world at the time. In fact, he may have been the richest human ever to live. The United States' wealth is currently valued at approximately $260 trillion. Subtracting $150 trillion of debt, this works out to about $100 trillion. That is how much the United States is worth. The value of the entire world is about $300 trillion. The second most valued country is China, with a value of about $50 trillion, about half of that of the United States. Japan is at about $30 trillion. The UK, Germany, and France at about $15 trillion, and on down the line. When converting riches to per capita income, the tiny peninsula nation in the Persian Gulf, Qatar, that's spelled Qatar, leads all with a per capita income of $125,000 per person. Luxembourg is number 2 with a per capita income of $110,000. The U.S. is 11th with a per capita income of $60,000. Now let's see how that translates into Solomon's time. Solomon's personal fortune, mind you, his personal fortune when he died contained 500 tons of gold. That is 500 times 2,000 or 1 million pounds of gold. Weight of a standard gold bar is 27 pounds. Dividing 27 into 1 million, we get the figure of 37,000 gold bars. To contrast this, the United States of America has the largest gold reserve in the world, estimated at 8,000 tons, only 16 times that of King Solomon himself. Germany is second with 3,000 tons, for those of you interested. Now, we come to the real stunning point of the story. As I said before, the United States net worth is valued at some $100 trillion, and the net worth of our world in 2018 is valued at some $300 trillion. Are you ready for this? King Solomon in 1000 BC, some 3,000 years ago, was estimated to be worth $60 trillion in today's market. Almost half of the current net worth of the United States, and 1/5 of that of the entire planet Earth. Let me repeat that. King Solomon himself was valued at $60 trillion. That does not take into account the country of Israel itself. If we estimate that Israel likely had a value of, say, 40 trillion more, then King Solomon's country, that of Israel, in 1000 BC had a value equal to that of the United States in 2018, 3,000 years later. Now you tell me, what more could this man possibly have or want? It is hard to even conceive of such wealth, or what anyone could possibly want or get or do with it, for that matter. There's been wide speculation by the historical and scientific world as to how King Solomon, or where King Solomon, acquired his wealth. There have been countless expeditions in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia to locate the mines of King Solomon. The lost mines of King Solomon have also been the subject of many books and motion pictures. However, to date, no one has verified where his mines were located. Speculation and biblical accounts also refer to his obtaining gold from other countries in the region. However, by hook or crook, he became one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest man who ever lived. Soon after his death, his country, the richest in the world, was torn apart by civil war and constant strife. Somehow it survived another 400 years before being conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, in 605 BC. King Solomon, the richest man in history, the man who had everything, was not a happy man. Let's take a look at his book Ecclesiastes to see why he was so unhappy and what his real expectations were. Let's see why this richest of men started out a biblical book with the words, "All is vanity." What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. Ecclesiastes 1, 3 and 4. Here Solomon says that no matter what he does or what he accomplishes during his life, it will all pass away when he does. Yet the earth will move ahead without him. All this is true, but I submit Solomon sees himself on a pedestal that is above his fellow humans. He knows he has superior knowledge and accomplishes much, but in the end he gains nothing. He just dies. In fact, all humans are created equal. That doesn't mean to say they are all the same, but are equal in the eyes of the universe. We are all placed in the human race the second we are born, and we are all given the capability to excel. We all do this to varying extents. As soon as we are about 2 years old, we begin to develop our own expectations. We like certain foods. We like certain activities. We like certain people. By the time we are in grade school, we have pretty much developed a plan for our own life. Circumstances may change it, but generally we have a pretty good idea of what type of life we want to pursue. Most of us do just that, but life always presents various options which might reroute us into a different set of expectations. Solomon is a perfect example of that. King David was a man who lived through very difficult and dangerous times. Through all his difficulties, he realized one thing. He realized that God, not he, was the ruler of the world, humanity, and of David himself. He realized God had certain expectations of him, and the closer he came to those expectations, the more valuable, the more satisfying, the more enjoyable, the more fulfilling, the more useful to all humanity his life would be. This realization that God was in control kept David grounded throughout his entire life. I dare say David is very high on the list of those who did more to make our world a better place. Maybe number one of all time. Others will argue for Alexander the Great, Plato, Da Vinci, Galileo, John the Baptist, Christ Joyce, Muhammad, Gandhi, George Washington, General Grant, Thomas Edison, and the list goes on and on. I'm sure each of us has our own choice. King David's son Solomon, who was given more to work with than any human being, could not figure out why he was not satisfied with his work as his life was winding down. What could he not figure out was that his God was in control, not him. 1,000 years before Solomon came along, our old friend Job ran into the same problem. It took crisis after crisis in his life for Job finally to realize that he was just a tiny speck in the universe. He finally figured out God was in control of all things and that he was just given the gift of life for a time. The more he did with it, the more he, Job, would be able to realize not only his expectations, but those of his God. Solomon had expectations, and yes, he fulfilled most of them, but he could not figure out why fulfilling all those expectations, why all his hard work seemed to have been for naught. He pours through 12 chapters of his second book, the little book of Ecclesiastes, citing vanity after vanity, calamity after calamity, success after success, failure after failure. Finally, the answer to his question, why is my successful life worthless, hits him square in the face. Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. Ecclesiastes 12:1. Solomon finally realizes what he should have done early in life. Yes, he should have had expectations and should have acted on them. But he failed to acknowledge the one who provided for all of him, the one who assisted him through life, the one who was pleased that he had accomplished much, the one who wanted to meet him again in the new world he was in the process of creating for him, the one who loved him more than a brother. Realizing what he should have done, Solomon now pens the one sentence that made his life worthwhile. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Ecclesiastes 12:13. He now figures out what his life was all about. He realizes he did fulfill a lot of his and God's expectations. He made Israel a rich and powerful nation. He built the most magnificent temple in all world history, and he wrote extensively about the nature of wisdom. What the wisest man to ever live excluded from his 80 years of life was the one person who was responsible for it all, his Creator, his God, the God of the universe. Has she consented to visit? The king asked his chief of staff. I believe so. We received a letter from Axum and 10 talents of gold via messenger this morning, the chief said. Oh, I hope she will finally come, the king said, rubbing his palms together. Is the royal guest house prepared? He asked. Everything is in readiness. Wine, food, boudoir, servants, escorts, everything a queen could want. Good, good. Did the messenger give any sort of timing? The king could never remember being so nervous. His hands were shaking. His palms were sweating. He was the richest man in the world. He had 700 wives and had seduced some of the most famous women in the world. There was Ashtaroth, goddess of Zidon, Milcom, the Ammonite, and Pharaoh's own sister-in-law, but of course, to seduce them, he had to build idols and worship their gods. At first it seemed abhorrent to him, but soon it became easy, especially when he found out what fantastic lovers these famous women were. He suspected their feminine charms were why they became famous. In any event, his conquest list was lengthy. But his Sheba queen seemed different. However, if he could seduce her, or maybe even marry her, he believed his life would be complete. "How's the negotiation going with my son?" the king asked. "Fine, your highness, fine. He'll be ready to take the throne," the chief of staff said. "And how about that upstart Jeroboam?" "He's out of the city. We're making plans to bring him to justice," the minister of defense said. "Elimination," the king said. "Yes, we will eliminate him," the defense minister said, then bowed. "You know, God will not let you eliminate him," the wily old prophet said. He was seated at a low table, eating some bread along with a couple of dried apricots. "God will let me do anything I want." The king waved his hand over the master throne room, then across the window, which revealed his great temple and the modern city named Jerusalem. The prophet smiled as he chewed away. "I told you what he told me." The king nodded. "You know what will happen? He's going to split your little kingdom in two," the prophet said. "Can I get some more apricots here?" He motioned to the servant holding a huge silver bowl of the orange fruit. "You know, you're wrong. Look at my kingdom. I made it the richest in all the world. It'll go on forever and even after I'm gone. That is, if I die at all." "Oh, you'll die all right," the prophet said. "You remember the scriptures. Enoch, Elijah, they didn't die. Well, they didn't accomplish half of what I have." The king smiled and his hand was relaxed. "As the saying goes, you got to pay the piper," the prophet said. "I'm paying him. Look at the temple I built," the king said, pointing to the window. "What about those other abominations, those other shrines to Chemosh or God of the Week or whoever? They mean nothing, just some artwork. I go to the temple every week to worship. You know that. You see me there. But where is your heart, really?" "I serve only the true God," the king said, standing. "Now let me ask you, Sonny, what if the Zidon, the Ammonites, the Egyptians ask you to let them build, say, small military forts near Jerusalem?" "That's different," the king said. "That would be a security threat." "So your God, my God, lets you build shrines near, in fact, Jerusalem. Do you think he perceives that as all right, or do you think he perceives that as a threat?" King sat back down in his throne. This little prophet was winning an argument. Something. He, the king, had never lost. However, he was saved by the bell. A series of chimes now rang, and a footman blew his trumpet. "I announce the arrival of Her Majesty, the Queen of Sheba." All in the court stood, including the king, all that is but the prophet. He was not about to let anything spoil his snack. The king walked down the several steps from his throne, took the hand of the most beautiful woman he had ever set his eyes on, and kissed it. She was tall, nearly as tall as he was. He was 6'4". He then escorted her to his throne and beckoned her to sit on it. She did so. He then raised his hand and then lowered them, beckoning all to bow to her. All did so, but one. "This is my new queen, Queen of Israel," he said. The stunned crowd remained bowed. Finally they began to stand. "I'm honored to receive such a great honor from the greatest king in the world," she said. He sat on a throne next to her, one reserved for the Queen of Israel, though there never was one. Soon the two were chatting away as if they had known each other all their lives. They talked for a good 2 hours. She told Solomon about the wonders of her country, Ethiopia, and he told her about his. Additionally, he began to expound on the wisdom he was famous for. He told her all he could think about nature and science, the universe, and the history of man. The two became more and more enthralled with one another, and soon were kissing passionately, throne to throne. Finally, the chief of staff broke up what was soon to become an orgy for two. "Dinner is served," he yelled at the top of his voice. The two lovers separated, straightened their robes, and walked hand in hand into the banquet hall, graced with a feast unequaled in the history of cuisine. History is very sketchy on the Queen of Sheba, or where even Sheba was. Other than the Bible, there are a few stories. The two most creditable are those of the queen from what is now Yemen, and of a queen from Ethiopia, from the city of Axum. The latter, Makeba, was said to have visited Solomon the Wise. As time marches on, more archaeological evidence will come to light. This Makeba is said to have had a child with King Solomon, Emperor Menelik I, whose line ruled Ethiopia until 1974, that is AD, when Haile Selassie was deposed as ruler of Ethiopia. That is a rule of some 3,000 years. In any event, our hero apparently finally found his true love after trying to make it happen with thousands of women. The Queen of Sheba may have finally been the one. But alas, according to the little history we have, the two never did marry, though I expect love found a way for the two to keep in touch until King Solomon finally succumbed to the Grim Reaper. I'm sure he was miffed that God did not take him straight through to heaven. When Solomon passed away at age 80, civil war broke out between his son Rehoboam, the new king, and his rival Jeroboam. The end result of that war was a divided nation, and we all know a divided nation cannot stand. Rehoboam ruled the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, while Jeroboam ruled the other 10 tribes. The strife continued another 400 years until Israel's God had finally had enough. He sent in Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of Babylon, to straighten out the mess. Nebuchadnezzar, too, failed to straighten out the mess, which continues to this day, 3,000 years later. God will finally have enough once more, and likely sooner than later. "So how did your board meeting go?" Spirit asked. "Okay, I guess," he said. "What did the angels have to say?" Spirit pressed. "Oh, they had that Luke do most of the talking. You know, I wish I'd never created him. He's the most perfect of all angels." He said, not sure he meant it. "Was our son there?" she asked. "No, he wasn't back from M484. I hope he got that star cluster back on its orbit," he said, knowing his son had. "I'm sure he did so." "So what?" he said. "So what happened?" Spirit said, impatient that she always had to pry things out of her husband. But something she always could do. The two never had any secrets. "Oh, Luke thinks if I show him the ropes, he can run the universe all by himself. That is, he and the other angels." "So why not let him try it?" Spirit said. "You know, and I know he can't. Angels aren't capable of running everything. No, that task is left to little old me. Sometimes I wish I could hand over the reins," he said, sighing. "You know, the last time I really rested, was when you created that little planet. What was it called?" Spirit said. "Earth," he said with disdain in his voice. "It was that 7th day I rested. I really rested," he said. "Maybe you can start up a new solar system, then rest after that one is done," she said, smiling. No, this one has caused me more trouble than all the others combined. I may never create another one," he said, slamming his fist on the table. A crack appeared in the smooth glass surface. "Now, baby, easy, calm down, we'll work it all out," Spirit said in a soft tone. "Sometimes I'm not so sure. Me, the ruler of the universe, is not so sure." He threw his hands in the air. "That's a joke." He gave a half-hearted laugh. "Well, there's always our son," Spirit said. He sighed again. "No, he's got a lot of work ahead of him," he said. "What work?" "He's working full-time now." "I got a little overtime work planned for him," he said. "Well, you better pay him more or he'll quit altogether. He's just a boy," she said protectively. "The price is too high. Even I don't have that kind of money." "Well, then you better do it yourself. You're overworking him already. Can't you see that?" she said. "Baby, he's got a job to do that even I can't do," he said. "What's that, my love?" she said, sitting down on his lap and cupping his tired face in her soft hands. "My dear, he's got to save the universe."